Okay, chat, we are back. We just beat Suikoden 4, so we're hot off the presses, as it were, to give our final thoughts of the game itself. So I'll let chat think about what they want to say. I guess I'll start from point to point. What is the game roughly about? The game is all about naval combat. Everything is basically themed around us being knights of an academy. We get banished in a typical JRPG manner, and we go around sailing to different islands to recruit people. So it's very much a naval take on the existing collect all 108 characters of the previous games. But I guess the question is, how did it compare to its predecessors? I'm gonna say, honestly, I feel like this game got a really bad rap. I don't think it was a great game by any stretch of the imagination, but when I heard people were just like really hating on the game, I honestly don't feel like it ever got to that level. There's definitely problems with the game, which we'll go to in more detail in just a minute or two. But I think overall, like honestly, it wasn't a very long game, which some people can see as like a pro or a con. So I don't feel like it ever quite got to the point of overstaying its welcome outside of one or two issues. However, I do think what kind of hurts it as a whole is a lot of the characters were just not as memorable. I think if they're gonna go with the Suikoden series where you can recruit random animals, it's definitely a letdown to not end up with a random animal. Like, of all the games to not include an octopus ally, you chose to not put the octopus ally in the ship game. I mean, come on, it was right there. It would have made sense. Thank you, Kurt, for resubscribing. So I think we're going to start diving a bit more into kind of spoiler territory, but those are, I guess, the initial review. So let's break it down into like what worked for me, what didn't work for me. The run speed. The run speed is hilariously dumb. The animation is very cheap looking, but this game would not be playable without it. Another thing that also is really good is the fact that you could teleport everywhere really early. If we didn't have that, the game probably would have added another 15 to 20 hours of playtime just kind of backtracking. Now I'm really glad that they did not hold off until the literal last quarter of the game like some of the previous Suikodens to do so. So very much appreciated. The game plays a little trick on you. You could skip cutscenes, but only a New Game Plus, so thanks, game. Just by the way, that would have also eliminated some very annoying points of the game where there are very long cutscenes before bosses, and if you die, you have to sit through that cutscene all over again, and they are horrendously long. I think one of the final boss cutscenes was over 3 minutes, unskippable, and it can't really be speed up because it's one of those cutscenes where they have to do certain animations. It's not just as fast as you can press the dialogue. So it's just kind of brutal. What else worked? I think there was an interesting balance of the combat system itself. I feel like I never had a truly useless character. Some characters just felt subpar as opposed to completely unplayable. So I like that, generally speaking, everybody had item slots open to them. I think it can be seen as a positive or a negative that they changed how you unlock rune slots. So some of the more melee-oriented characters just naturally didn't get a lot of rune slots. But now all the characters that naturally get high magic get rune slots faster, which kind of makes sense. It also kind of makes it a bit more generic, and for people looking for that extra touch with some of the character stats, I feel like they might be a little disappointed there. I mean, I think the game has always been about interchangeable characters. It's just that in this one, it's kind of more so than usual. Kind of fitting into a pro and a kind of a whiff, they reduced the number of characters from 6 to 4, which I have to say I'm not a really big fan of, but I don't think it was a deal breaker for me, to be honest. Like, combat is never something I super care about in a Suikoden game. I just want to be sucked into the characters. You know, strifes and combats are doing all sorts of ridiculous things. Combat is just kind of the filler between plot in these kinds of games, let's be honest. So it's a little on the easier end at points, The game does want you to grind a lot, and I think that ends up being kind of a negative with the game in particular because the encounter rate is out of control. This game has a pretty bad encounter rate. There are things it gives you towards the middle of the game to deal with it, like being able to instantly kill an encounter versus just retreat, or to make enemies weaker than you not appear at all. But it's not really going to help you towards the final end of the game unless you power grind off of training stuff. So I still feel like it's not as bad as like it was in Suikoden 3 when it came to combat, but it was still kind of up there. I think the problem with it is like because you can move really fast, it also checks for combat more often. So sometimes I'll like hilariously take like a fraction of a bent leg forward, and that will be enough when transitioning into an area to start combat, which is really stupid. They needed to at least have it reset between screens or something. I mean, at one point, Chad even saw I literally rotated in place to open a door, and that triggered combat. And I was like, are you serious? So yeah, combat, way out of control. In terms of the pace of it, though, it was like okay. The animations were a little faster than in 3, so overall, it wasn't like you're spending a huge amount of time in combat, even though combat occurred often. Their take on the naval combat, I did like, even though it wasn't really hard. I think only literally the last one did we even lose a ship. So they tried something. It wasn't the most thrilling thing ever, but I didn't feel like frustrated or annoyed with it. Like, I thought about it. It was mostly about prep, where you get to assign an element cannon to your ship. And in kind of an extended rock, paper, scissors, except with 5 elements, you figure out which element on the element pentagon beats what. And you could kind of go from a strategy standpoint there. Character levels were kind of important in the naval combat, so you could board their ship. I don't think the enemies ever did it. I don't even think they can do it. So if you do want to skip that element of the game and you happen to have power leveled or at least have decent gear, the game gives you the option. So it's kind of nice it gives you that. It's kind of bad that for some reason it stops you from using runes, so rune users are kind of useless there. As usual, the magic users, OP. They're super good pretty much throughout the whole game. I think not until at least the halfway point where you start getting things that give berserk, do the melee characters even start to make any kind of comeback. And with the way combos work in this game, I think they do have a good potential of being best party members. In particular, if you pair up characters that can hit all enemies, since combo attacks can now scale upwards the more time you use them, and they level, I think, up to 3 times for additional damage. So that's a lot of potential damage multipliers between 2 different characters adding their strength together. So I think combo attacks generally felt decent. I think the problem with some of them, again, is more that you're forced to use a character that was kind of weak in stats. So, like, they'll sometimes try to compensate by having a higher damage multiplier, but just the fact that you're using characters that are like a 80 strength mage instead of your 200 something strength, you know, manslayer unit, it does make a difference, even with the ratio, unfortunately. It definitely failed kind of hard on the menus. They tried to simplify it so that you didn't have to have inventory per character like in the other games, and they tried having a more standard JRPG menu, which sounds okay at first, until you realize that it just tells you so little information. In a game with a lot of different mechanics behind it, like genuine mechanics, like percentage damage multipliers for different elements or just your stats, it doesn't tell you how any of that works. It'll just give you something like increases magic attack. But you're like, by how much? Is it better than what I have before? Even just simple things like comparing your equipment to the equipment in the shop is a nightmare. Because you can't see if it raises your other stats. You can't even see in general if it's giving you a percentage boost to anything. You can't tell what set bonuses give, even though set bonuses are very obvious, I would say, and pretty strong. it still doesn't tell you the extent until you get to that point, which I find is very weird. In a game centered around collecting many different treasures, I find it really weird that it tells you almost nothing about the item that you have. So, big whiff there. Another place where it really whiffs with the menus, and this ends up actually really being a detriment to the game, equipping different party members is such a hassle. They took a step backwards from the other games. Normally, if you build up your equivalency of a castle where everybody stays, you're able to very easily blacksmith or equip or swap runes between all of your characters. And in this game, they don't let you do that. You have to put them in the active party. And when your active party is only 4 people, that's kind of a problem. There's like 60-something playable characters. The rest are kind of support role characters. And it's like, why would they do this? And kind of coupled with that, the support characters, they don't make it clear which ones are better than others. So they went backwards again from Suikoden 3. Suikoden 3 had the concept of character ranks. So you could see if I'm like a C rank in healing versus a B rank in healing, you're like, oh, I found a better support unit to what I'm using. In this game, you just have to guess. Sometimes it could actually be a downgrade. I'll give a great example. We got a doctor early on, and he had the highest rank in heal in the game, and every character afterwards you got that had healing is just so much worse. But you would have to just kind of guess. Like, sometimes you could kind of tell from the profession, but then other times, like, the person who's really good at drinking tea is the best at finding treasure? Like, what? Not the character that goes around collecting treasure maps? I don't know. Like, it's kind of nonsensical. Chad also heard me complain various times. Trying to figure out how to put people in your party is such a nightmare in this game. They really... I know they want to sort it by star order, but if they're not going to tell you what stars they are when they are recruited, and or put the star name up whenever you see them in general in normal party menus versus like deep in a status menu, I'm not gonna learn your really arbitrary sorting of 100 and something characters. Like, it is so disorienting to see, like, it's not by name, it's not even by relationship, it is just, for all intents and purposes, random. It's not even the order you collect the characters. It's quite ridiculous. I think the game almost had, like, a strong point when it came to the naval combat on the overworld versus, combat in the overworld, where it encouraged you to have up to 2 reserve parties, so you could actually just play with the other people while you're just traveling around on the overworld, which is kind of neat. It means you could kind of keep some people up to level. I think it kind of flubs the execution a bit, because it takes a while to swap parties. Like, we're talking upwards of like 6 seconds on the swap, which, given that combat might not even last 9 seconds, that's kind of long. It is useful if you get attacked by like a surprise boss. I will say, like, then that feature is genuinely always appreciated. But yeah, definitely a little bit of a miss there. The fact that you can rest basically anywhere also kind of breaks the difficulty of the game in anything that is not a dungeon, which is kind of unfortunate. So magic users could just be restocked to full instantly and you don't have to care. So kind of a weird choice on their part, I would say. Another thing kind of going into the menus not being clear hurting the game, it was really not obvious what characters paired up with whom in order to get more attacks. So for example, if you get 3 family members together, they'll have a family attack, right? Makes sense. But then, like, you have to pair up the pirate with the berserker who've never shared a scene together, and that produces a duo attack? Even though they have no relationship to each other. It's very strange. So, like, if you're not sitting there with a guide, it's gonna be really obtuse as to how you even get more combo attacks. Which, by the way, they not only do they not tell you which characters get combo attacks, but they also require X number of battles to even unlock. So, if you were doing this blind, it would take, like, literally hundreds, if not thousands of battles to check every combination of 3 characters plus pro tag. Also, the fact you can't sub out the pro tag is obnoxious. Please just let us sub out the pro tag finally in a Suikoden game. So, I just find it very strange, where it's like, it lets you have options to swap your characters, but the way it does it discourages you from doing so. which is kind of unfortunate. Steve says they're dating off screen. Maybe. I feel like some big issues with the game in general is just the characters. They weren't the worst characters we've seen in Suikoden. I think they just suffer from being very subpar. There were like maybe a couple of notable characters that I would say chat would maybe remember outside of Suikoden 4. But I don't think they had like the strong personality or some of the plot arcs we've seen in the previous games, so they felt kind of wasted. Like, chat might remember Eleanor, they might remember the Shirtless King, right? There's like a handful of characters, yeah, you probably remember them. Maybe you remember the Rousreal Knights to some extent. You might remember Chipu, the cat person. But then it's like you get characters that are like in the 90 star region, and they are like the ultra reject characters. Like, one of the characters' things was like he hadn't washed in months, was like his contributing final part to his story, because he had no plot. He just existed. You know what I mean, chat? I just, you know, it's always going to be that problem when you have 108 characters. Some are going to be paper thin. But man, they were really scraping the bottom of the barrel with some of these character choices. Now, granted, as I said before, they aren't the worst we've ever seen. See Suikoden 3 with the, oh my gosh, the Appraiser character. Definitely one of the worst characters in the Suikoden series. But when it comes to some of those other things, it's just, I don't know. I feel like, you know, there wasn't a character that was like overly annoying outside of Snow. Chat will probably remember their hatred for Snow for a while. But in terms of like the protagonist being really compelling, not really. I feel like, unlike the other Suikoden games, we never really learned about the protagonist. Like, Suikoden 1 was very family-based, and we go against like our father, essentially. In Suikoden 3, we go, our father figure dies, I guess? But we don't really know anything about the character prior to the academy. And because he's very blank slatey, his story isn't really compelling. So he has to be carried by other characters. While people might like some of the voice actors and actresses to kind of carry them, like I think Kika being voiced by a very famous voice actress helps a little bit. I think it's just the problem is that I think some of the characters just don't stand up at all. Like, they are just not really interesting. They're not terrible. They're just not compelling if you want people to continue playing the game. Like, some of them are kind of stereotypy, some are just kind of odd. It's just kind of like, just kind of, As I said before, it doesn't have the worst characters, but it might have some of the worst overall cast. Because I do have to say, a lot of the characters, in particular, if we're going to compare the previous game, 3 to 4, there were a lot more memorable characters in 3, because almost every major playable character had a scene or two. Like, all of the knights under Lady Chris, for example, you would remember. All the people under Godot, you would remember. Everybody meeting with Hugo and that horrible character named Lily. Chat would remember most of those characters. Whereas this one, it's like, the story was a little bit about Kika, a little bit about the king, and that was kind of it. I guess it was also the Rousreal Knights. Like, maybe less than 10 characters we're talking about. Yeah, there's no queen, no monster units. Sorry, chat. So, we'll talk about, I guess, other things that worked. I think overall, let me think. I think the soundtrack was fine. I don't know if I'll, like, re-listen to every song, but I think it fit the mood pretty well. I think the naval combat theme was pretty nice, for example. The intro was okay. You know, I think the music worked for what it was. The game has a lot of kind of iffy changes. I think they mostly fixed magic in terms of making sure that spells weren't, like, ridiculously weak. I'm looking at you, Suikoden 3, with some of those rune balancing voices. I think there's still a handful that just still aren't really all that great. Like, Medicine Rune is, I think, technically better than in 2, but it's still not really that great. Double Strike, you can't really play around with it as much because you don't get the Firefly rune from more than one character. Yeah, it's just kind of like iffy. I will say, like, the concept of being on the boat is cool, but it does suffer, sort of like in 3, of having really big open areas with not a lot to do in them. And I think the ship, funny enough, the fact that it is a naval-based game and you move around on this boat, the boat is one of the clunkiest things I have ever seen. I don't think I've even properly explained it while playing the game, but that thing was atrocious to steer. This thing couldn't remotely go near any islands. I have never seen a game fight me so hard to not go towards a port. Like, it is literally like, I could be 3 or 4 boat lengths away from the island, but it's like, oh no, I've hit some weird invisible barrier, and the game will literally hard turn me away from where my destination is because I'm like maybe half a ship width too far over. And then in that forced movement, it'll force you to have combat, which is so dumb. So big F- on whoever designed the boat controls in that game. You could also just, instead of turning really slowly and moving fairly slowly, I find it funny you could just go to the map and just click an opposite direction to where you're facing and have an instant turn in place, which is also very much not like how boats are meant to work. So they kind of failed the ship theme of the ship theme game. So do better, Suikoden, if you're gonna do alternate movement. Please don't let there be another boat like this in other games. In terms of plot, I think the betrayal arc was fine. I feel like the ending was a little rushed. In fact, I feel like half of the game felt a little rushed. In fact, let me, before I go to the end of the game, I forgot one of the most important things, the biggest negative detractor of the game. I'm gonna let chat guess what my biggest complaint about the game is. I'm sure chat knows what I'm about to bring up. I've not mentioned it so far. But it is one of the worst things I have ever experienced in an RPG. I felt so frustrated with it. There is no way they playtested this feature. I'll give chat another second. Oh, chat is on the money. Treasure maps. Treasure maps were garbage. How dare they turn the idea of finding treasure by looking at a piece of a treasure map and trying to figure out which island it corresponds to. How dare they turn it into what they turned it into in Suikoden 4? So, like, you go around. There's no indication treasure maps are anywhere on the world map. You just have to mash confirm thousands of times as you're walking around. It could be literally anywhere. Dead end, wall, random barrel. Doesn't open up. Let me remind you, no item prompts. We're not in the modern RPGs. It is randomly placed. Edge of a well, the backside of a bar seat. That one was my favorite one that I missed. Sometimes they're in treasure chests, which makes sense to some extent. But man, oh man, it is just such a mess. So not only are they just atrocious to find, and they're also missable, by the way. A double whammy for people that get mad for not 100%ing a game. On top of that, you then have to get them identified. But then, instead of it just being something simple, like you just walk around and you figure out what you need to do based off the map, you would think if it's gonna do that, it's gonna give you some decent clues at least. And the answer is no, chat. The answer is absolutely not. It is not gonna teach you how to do anything. My favorite was, it gives you a map. There is like maybe one dark spot on the entire map. The rest of the map is the map color. And they put an X in the middle. And they're like, guess what island it's in? There's no landmarks on the map. What is the point of giving you... They gave you, like, almost literally a blank piece of paper to look at. I'm like, are you serious? Do you know how many beaches there are on these islands? Do you know, like, this could correspond to anything? And then, like, the triple whammy of insults. So the first blow to you are the really obtuse maps that literally could be anywhere and defeats the whole purpose of it. Then you have to go through, and not only can you not run around while finding it, you have to walk slowly because you have to play as the treasure map finder. And then by doing this game where you hold little sticks up, in order to figure out where things are meant to go, it'll like vibrate or move more depending on how close you are to it. That's when you realize they didn't place the treasures in the right spots for some of the maps. And it is the most awful experience. We clipped it on our playthrough. It happened not once, not twice, but 3 different times. We received a map and it was not where the X was on the map. I'm not even talking like, oh, it's a couple pixels off. It was legitimately not in the right area. Like, there is no way you could move the world map to match the map that was the hint for where the treasure was. That is unacceptable for a minigame. That is the whole point of the minigame, is to use those maps to find it. And those maps don't always work. So either they're obtuse or they're just flat out wrong. And the landmarks on the map provided don't match the world map. Ridiculous. I think my other part where you could tell that they didn't playtest it and they had rushed the feature is that not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times, chat. 4 times in a randomly selected set of maps, it used the same map with the same X mark, and all they did was rotate the map. We had 4 clues for the same spot in the same island, and the only difference was how zoomed out the map was and the rotation. It was otherwise literally probably pixel the exact same coordinates that we got the other treasures. So ridiculous. Absolute fail. One of the worst mini games I've ever played. That was so frustrating on so many levels. Welcome the Fabled One. Don't play the treasure maps. They are garbage. Listen, chat, if they're not going to play test it, they are not. You've paid to play the game, potentially. They should be paying you to play test their treasure maps. I'm just saying, chat, that feature was clearly not finished. I feel like some of that kind of came into the later half of the game as well. It does feel like things were not finished. It feels like some cutscenes went from fairly smooth transitions in the beginning, like you have like the whole torchlight ceremony into the betrayal, into everything else. And then the last half of the game, cutscenes just kind of end awkwardly. Like, I think the one that was most jarring was actually not even that long ago. It was in the final session where we start walking up this cliffside, go into the final fortress, and then it immediately cuts away to a naval battle. And you're like, oh, okay. So then you defeat the Navy ship, and you're about to do something, and then it cuts back to the other people. But, like, it doesn't follow up on what the other team does. It just moves on. It just kind of abruptly ends, like, mid-cutscene. It's just very awkwardly handled. That's a Konami standard? Maybe. I don't know. I haven't played a lot of Konami RPGs, to be honest. Yeah, very, very disappointing, I would say, towards the end. Definitely the quality was lower towards the end compared to the first half of the game. Which, again, would make sense if they had a kind of a rushed development cycle. And that's where I kind of got it. So I can see where some people might have been turned off from the game, is that some of it felt very simplified. They tried to appeal to a wider audience, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if it's still executed well, but it still had some execution issues. So overall, it was just okay. I didn't hate the game. I didn't love the game. Would I replay it? Probably not. New Game Plus skipping cutscene might interest me in maybe like a speedrun challenge of it, just because, again, I really don't want to sit through like 5 minutes of unskippable cutscene. But I don't feel like the game itself was that compelling in order to really go back to it and say I beat it at a low level. I don't think it had the same kind of appeal as some of the other things that we played, unfortunately. It's definitely not the worst game that we played on stream, so let me just be very clear. The treasure map was one of the worst mini games we've ever played on stream, for sure. Hands down, it's just atrocious. This is bad. That was like several hours of life wasted for very mediocre rewards. I will say I'm not a big fan of them hiding things like lore books as rewards for gamble game stuff, I really don't like that as a game practice. I'm like, listen, I'm not gonna play 2 hours of battle tops just to get 3 pages in a book. Do you know what I mean, chat? Like, I don't feel that kind of compulsion. Very, very disappointing when it comes to that. I would say what I'm hoping for, I guess in the future Suikoden games, I hope they go back to maybe the 6-person combat. I don't mind them experimenting as long as they don't literally carbon copy 4. I think they could do some more interesting things with it. I do like the idea of like combo attacks leveling up. I hope that moves on to the next games, or characters having different skill ranks would be good. Well, actually, one thing I'd also state in addition to the menu fail. So apparently characters also had different affinities for runes, but the game doesn't tell you what their affinities actually are. So it's like they just they kept the feature from 3, but they forgot to tell you what those bonuses were. So again, like, that kind of goes into the it feels not quite completed category of things. Just like, why have a feature if you're not going to explain it or show it to the player, but it has a tangible effect on the gameplay that players may or may not understand why they're not doing enough damage. Also, one weird thing we came across with the magic, I will say, I really did not understand why our fast-moving characters would sometimes go dead last casting spells, and then sometimes first. I really don't understand how speed interacted with spells throughout the whole game. I'm sure there are guides online talking about how that was supposed to work. I just find it kind of insulting that you have like a 180 speed character doing like a rank 2 or a rank 3 spell, not even rank 4. So we're talking like kind of on the lower end. And then they lose to somebody casting a rank 3 who only has 50 speed? Like, what? I'm like, in what? That just blew my mind. I don't like what they did with that. I hope they undo whatever they did there. Now, this game does have a follow-up. We'll be, I think, playing through it next. So we'll see if the universe holds up. I have to say, like, the islands are okay, but I'm not really a big fan of them either. So unfortunately, of all the universes to get a sequel in, we're kind of getting it to this one. I would have been more interested in seeing stuff related to maybe one of the other Suikoden games. Who knows, maybe that's what Suikoden 5 is about, but unfortunately, Tactics is, I think, a direct sequel to this game. So we'll see. I'm not sure what they're going to do without rune cannons, question mark. Since allegedly they just disappeared from the face of the earth. Oh, P.S. by the way, hope you read that one book that explains it, because the plot doesn't say that, actually. It's somewhat implied, but it is not clear. Yeah. So, I think I don't have too much else to say about the game. So, Chad, if you want to throw out any last words on the game itself. Again, like, I saw a lot of comments, people saying it was their least favorite Suikoden or is the most hated game. They really didn't like it. And I'm like, we've played worse RPGs, and I don't even think this was the worst Suikoden. I'm gonna be real with you. Like, I know this is gonna be a hot take, but I think just due to things like the movement and the really bland dungeons, even though I really like the characters in 3, I think 3 might have been the worst of the series. I just don't think, like, a game like this one taking 40 hours or less with the same problems that existed in 3, I find it really hard to believe that this game is quote-unquote worse than 3. Like, I would say there's elements of the other games that are definitely better than this one, but, like, overall, like, I would rather play this game over the second one and the third one. Because I genuinely did not like the second game. The third game just got really tedious. It was like a stamina fest. Yeah, chat's rating it the second best one we've played so far. I agree. I still like the first one more. I just like the characters, the humor, the music, the pacing of the combat, the party system itself. It just worked better for me. I also just like the characters more. So I'll probably stick to that one. Boats should not fight you the way ours did. Yeah, boats are just ridiculous. The cats need a chiropractor. That's a good point. There were more beast characters instead of animal units, and they had very strange postures. I do like that actually nearly every character was voiced. So shoutouts to Suikoden 3 actually voicing a majority of the cast. Like, think about it, chat. That's a lot of characters that needed voices. And every plot cutscene was voiced. That's a lot to fit on one disc. So we'll see. I think, you know, they got a little more comfortable into the world of 3D, but I think they're still falling into some of the same traps that we've seen in particular in Suikoden 3, where the dungeons don't have a whole lot going on in them. I think they realized people miss treasure chests, so they added a lot more of them in 4, but it's just kind of okay. Yeah, so it's just like, again, I'm curious to see where it goes across the next couple of games. The direct next game to this one is not going to play anything like this. So they're going to be hopefully given more time. Maybe they'll let it brew a little bit longer and kind of tidy up the combat. Like, I can see where they were going with it. And I'm not really that upset. I mean, Suikoden 3, you basically only played with 3 characters. Like, it was a 6-party system, but you only controlled 3 at any given time, realistically. This one, you just control 4. So if we just go back up to maybe 5 or something, could be nice. We'll see. I'm not sure how I feel about them keeping it to more standard JRPG. It was different. I think as long as they don't lose sight of the things that make Suikoden with the rune slots, interchanging rune magic, combo attacks by pairing people together, the release system. Oh, I didn't really talk about that. I guess that's one thing I didn't mention. They did mostly fix escape and release and potch to avoid combat. It felt really busted in 3. Like, it just like never activated, and or the requirements to do so were just ridiculously high, that it basically was disabled the majority of the game. This one actually wasn't too bad. You had to get, I think, 2 levels on average above the enemy, and then it started becoming consistent, which is a little slow, but given how much combat there was, it wasn't incredibly hard to get to. In particular, when we were just going back and recruiting characters, we always got to release them. And the fact that it paired with a rune that lets you instantly kill them and still get money, that was a good touch. So, yay to them for not messing that part of it up, I guess. I like it when escape is more than a 50-50. I feel like escape just legitimately didn't work in Suikoden 3. I think there were times where I retreated, I think 4 or 5 times in a row and couldn't escape. I'm like, seriously? And we just basically game over. Rare bosses are gone, I guess, from 3. I don't really miss them. They were kind of there in the overworld, but they weren't there in dungeons, at least. I would have been really mad if we fought super bosses in the dungeons, to be honest. That were, like, if they were physically on the map, like some of them were, I'm okay with it. If it's just a random encounter as a random super boss, I don't want it. I don't want to see that ever again. Yeah, no more crab murder. I will say it was a bit more creative with the bad ending of the game. I like the goofy drawings as you get stuck on the island. I thought that was a nice touch. Other than that, chat, I don't really have too much else to say. I guess we'll see the fate of the characters later. Yeah, Leviathan went sailing. The chess bosses were something. Yeah, I think not having repeatable encounters is fine, because there's enough different ways to level. Maybe they'll bring it back, maybe they won't from 3. But I think that's at least that's my final thoughts. I wish we could have kept those portraits. Yeah, that's unfortunate. So, I guess so long for now, Suikoden 4. I don't think we'll pick you up again for another playthrough, but we're leaving on amicable terms, which could be, you know, I had a lot of complaints in particular for the treasure map, but again, it is still not one of the worst games we've played on stream. As a reminder, think about those standards. So for now, chat, we're at the point in the review / the final thoughts that I'm sure you're all aware of, and that is saying goodbye to YouTube. So if you got to this point in the review / the final thoughts, I'd just like to say thank you for watching, and hope to see you again next time.